Welcome back to another episode of the Startup Therapy Podcast. This is Ryan Rutan, joined as always by my friend and the founder and CEO of startups.com, Wil Schroter. Wil, it's not exactly a secret. You've been pretty vocal about this in a lot of places that you haven't always had the most healthy relationship with your startups, past, present, and maybe future. We'll find out. Let's go back in time. Take a trip down memory lane. When did that relationship start? How did it start? And when did it start to go south?
It actually started practically at birth, but certainly in my childhood. I had a tough childhood, which is certainly a part of it. But a lot of it came from, I had this huge insecurity that I didn't have security, right? That I needed to do something to get beyond this station, to create a world where I could be self-sustaining and do my own thing. I'd not have to be reliant on other people who, historically for me, weren't reliable.
Yeah.
Well, that started things. And that became the impetus for what would be a very unhealthy relationship with work. And it started this sprint. The sprint looks something like this. I have to keep running as fast as I can so that I can avoid this big shadow, this gray cloud that was over me. And if I keep running, and if I run away from that fear about that insecurity, then I'm good. But if I stop for one moment, I don't work harder, I don't keep pressing away from that fear, I'm screwed, right? The whole world's going to come crashing down. This awful thing is going to get me, and all my insecurities are going to, come to the surface, and my whole life is going to be ruined. That's how I started my career. And I don't think I'm the only one.
Is that what they call hitting the ground running?
Yeah. I think some people go into their careers, and I'd be curious to think about, hear how you did it. Some people go into their careers with the idea of building more, getting more, accomplishing more. I went into my career by just out of sheer terror. I just wanted to get away from this dark cloud. And I was willing to run as hard as I needed to for as long as I needed to keep that going. But the epilogue, and we'll talk through this, is that the cloud never went away. No matter what I accomplished, no matter how far I ran, it never went away. So my unhealthy relationship with work never went away. If you rewind, same trip down memory lane, where does yours start and how does it develop?
All right, so before we get into this next topic, I just want to let you know, what we talk about here is 1% of the conversation. Really this conversation is going on all day long online at groups.startups.com, where Ryan and I pretty much talk endlessly with founders about every one of these topics. So if by the end of this discussion, you like the topic and you want to dig into it a little bit more with Ryan and I, just head to groups.startups.com and we'll pick it up from there.
It's also pretty early. Mine was a bit different in that I felt like I was going to have to keep up with something, right? I wasn't running away from something. I was running towards something that I was not sure in any way, shape, or form how I could live up to. My father was a larger than life character for me, and still in many ways is. And it was always this question of how will I ever do that, right? And there were some things that happened early on that kind of set that cadence. I saw how much my dad worked. And as a surgeon, he was always on, right? The phone would ring all hours of night. And this was back when it was just a phone in your house. So when it rang, everybody heard it. So we knew, right? The phone would ring all hours of the night. And he was always on. So there was this sense that he had this kind of unhealthy relationship. I didn't see it that way. I just thought that's what you do. You're just always available, right? There's always going to be something that can, pop out of the darkness and you have to respond to it. And I turned that into kind of a superhero quality in my dad's case. And so there was always the sense that I would need to live up to that same kind of standard. The other thing, and this was one that came up kind of later in career as I had kids, and I started to realize there was something that he executed that I was, again, not sure how I would do this. For as much as the guy worked, and he worked like crazy, and like I said, he was always on, he always found time to be there for our events, things that we were doing, right? He'd pop out for an hour and show up somewhere, and he'd be there, and then he'd go right back to working. And so again, there was this cadence that he had set around working all the time, doing all this stuff, but also managing to be present. And then I'm going like, wow, how the hell do I create that part? Like I got the, like, I can work really hard part, I can chase, but then how do I find an environment where I can also shift gears and be where I need to be, or be where I want to be, or be where somebody else wants me to be? And so for me, it was always this sort of chasing this idealized state of work where, you know, I was working hard and accomplishing the things I wanted to, but I was also present. And just setting standards for myself that, one, probably weren't even close to true, right? Like these were the romanticized version of how all this worked in my brain. And so that was a big driver for me. It was always sort of like, how am I going to live up to these expectations that, by the way, you know, to his credit, were never foisted upon me. Always supportive, but never telling me to do anything. And somehow that made it even worse. It was like, if he had just defined an expectation, it would have been far easier than me inventing them in my head. You and I talk about this all the time, but these one-sided conversations that we have in our heads tend not to work in our favor. So for me, the unhealthy relationship started early by trying to build towards some glamorized, romanticized version of what work and accomplishment actually meant, and making them way outsized for what I was capable of at any given time.
So the opposite of opportunity is consequence.
Yep.
When you think about the consequence of not achieving or doing the things that your father would have implied, what does that consequence look like to you?
Well, that's what's funny, is that I wasn't looking at it that way, right? I wasn't thinking about it. You know, I had the consequences were that meant I had failed, right? But we talk about this a lot too. Let's define failure. Let's talk about what actually happens if you fail. Do I end up destitute and then starve to death in an alleyway? Probably not, right? Maybe, probably not. But that was sort of how it felt. And there wasn't any spectrum for me. It was sort of achieve this and be successful, or don't achieve exactly that and be a failure, right? There was no there was no soft middle. It was either I win or I lose, and it was binary for me. And that was part of what set up the really unhealthy conditions for how I treated work and how I measured what success looked like and all those things, which I have a much better relationship with it now. I've gotten a little wiser as I've gotten older. Maybe I've just gotten tired of running so hard. But something happened where, you know, there was at least a mental shift. Not that I've got the perfect relationship with work at this point, but it's certainly better in terms of how I think about it at this stage.
You know, it's interesting. You know, mentioned consequence. For me, consequence went out the door a long time ago, right? I was early in my career. I made a little bit of cash, and it wasn't that I made so much money that I'd never have to work again, or I was so rich that I just would never think about money again. It wasn't that, but I had made enough where I could buy a house, a car, furniture, you know, the stuff that you try to go out and achieve. And I had some security in the bank.
Yep.
But nothing changed. And that's what kind of threw me. I thought for sure if I had achieved those milestones, because it was so clear. Here's the thing. When you don't have that stuff, getting it seems like such an obvious fix because you don't have it. So it's so binary. But all of a sudden, I was in this space where I had it and I didn't feel any better whatsoever. And I'll say this. If I could choose between not having any of it and feeling shitty and having it and feeling shitty, I'll take the have it version.
I'd rather be feeling shitty in the house I own, on the couch I own, having just returned in the car I own.
That's what I'm saying. Sure. Like, I remember seeing, yet another billionaire say, money doesn't matter. It doesn't buy you anything. I was like, dude, that's because you have it. Right. It matters when you
hand it over, unencumber yourself, friend, and then tell me how you feel.
But what was interesting was the guilt didn't go away. I thought for sure that because I had achieved this basic level of security, that the guilt would go away. And I could say, I'm not going to run from that shadow anymore. And it turned out the shadow just morphed. Instead of it being about basic survival, it all of a sudden became, well, if you've achieved this, that's your baseline now. If you don't achieve at least this going forward and more, you're a total loser. You know who told me that? Absolutely no one. No one had ever said that to me. I've got this story of my daughter this past weekend. She did her first gymnastics competition and it was awesome. And before she went on to do her routines, I said to her, when you see mom and dad in the stands, don't look at us and think I have to perform wonderfully for us because we don't care. And when I say that, we hope you do great. But what we're looking for is whether you're smiling, whether you're happy, whether you're enjoying it. Because if you're not, doesn't matter. So she does the competition. She wins some medals. And as far as she was concerned, she was Simone Biles. Like she won the entire Olympics, right?
Yep.
Which was awesome.
That's awesome, man.
But
Yep.
here was the
Feels so
interesting
good.
point. Next morning, we get up. And Summer, my daughter and I, we get up at like 5 a.m. So we're sitting there, enjoying our morning the next day. And I asked her, I said, you've got these medals. How do you feel? You've got 7 more competitions coming. How do you feel? And she said, it just means I need to do better. And I thought to myself, there it is.
Yep, there it is.
Right? I didn't tell her that. I didn't even imply it. I said the polar opposite. And yet, here's this 10-year-old sweet, innocent girl that's created this pressure. This is how it starts. That shouldn't or doesn't exist. But it's real. It keeps you up quite literally at night. Keeps me up at night.
It's interesting, right? So this happens in so many aspects of our lives, right? Where what once was the thing we strived for becomes our baseline now. And to some degree, that's, I'm sure there's some biology to that. There's certainly a lot of psychology to that. And it's understandable to some degree, right? Particularly, if you have a competitive streak, a competitive, bent to you, if I've already achieved that, well, now I want to achieve more. I've done that. I don't want to just keep doing the same. I want to achieve more. So I get it, but there have to be limits to that, right? I think that's part of where we start to go off the rails is that we just keep trying to achieve more and more and more, and the float keeps rising along with the tide, and there's just the baseline just keeps getting higher and higher and higher. Nothing wrong with that until you get to that point where, like, physically, mentally, emotionally, you can't get to that next level, and then instead of being really happy with everything that you've achieved up until that point, all you recognize in that moment is that I failed to get to the next level. Not that I beat the previous 32, right? I just can't
especially
beat the
for
next
founders.
one. Yeah, and as founders, it's such a painful thing to watch. And I think it was last episode I referenced a founder that I had talked to who was really down on himself around the fact that they hadn't hit the big hit within the VC type approach they were taking, right? They were looking to this massive scale, but what they had built was a profitable, stable business with happy, healthy employees, except for him. And it was like, man, I can see this so clearly, and yet he can't, because all he's thinking about was, I reached for the next rung and I slipped. Not, I am really, really far from where I started. I have come so far. I have climbed so high, and yet all that matters is the delta between where I am and that next rung, which is a small percentage difference from where I am compared to where I started, right? So it's painful. I want to circle back on something for a second, if you don't mind. Because in the beginning you were talking about fear, right? You're running away from this idea that you won't be secure, right? You're scared and you want to fix that, and I get that one. Then you introduce another concept, and I want to see, do they coincide, or was this something that came later? And that's around the idea of guilt, right? So did the guilt come in after you had achieved what you needed, and so you weren't scared anymore, but now you felt guilty if you weren't trying to achieve more? Was that the case, or how do those two things play together?
Right now, I think I mentioned I've got 2 modes at this stage of my career, and it hasn't changed, which again is the whole premise here. Either work all the time or I feel guilty. There's no in between. There's no not working and feeling okay. Now, I do take time off. I do do things that aren't work. I'm not working 100-hour weeks anymore. I'm just not. I also know it's not effective. I also just can't. But the problem is, like, take today, for example. If I were to say, I'm going to go take an hour to do, you name it. Let me go in the workshop and work on something. Hell, even go to a doctor's appointment. Something I have to do. I feel like I'm playing hooky.
Quality time. Yeah, exactly.
I feel like I can only pay for it with guilt. And I know, hell, we're doing a podcast on it, dude. I know this is a stupid feeling. We were doing one of the founder group workshops last week, and we were talking about just founder emotions and things like that. And someone had written in the chat, they said, a little bit of guilt is a small price to pay for a better life. And I thought about that again. Makes total sense. I'm paying for a better life with a little bit of guilt, small price to pay. And yet I can't do it. I'm so conditioned to be in this messed up kind of world. And again, I'm well aware of it. Also worth noting, I'm at a point in my life, at my now late 40s, as weird as that is for me to say, where I can't let it go anymore. I can't kick the can anymore.
Yep.
It's no
You have to
longer
address
okay.
it. Yep.
20s, 30s, 40 or early 40s, I was like, oh, I'll worry about that later. Right now, I'm like, I'm about halfway through life. I better figure this shit out now because
Yes.
I don't have, like, I hope I live a long time. I hope you do too, but I don't have exponential amounts of time. And more importantly, with the time that I do have, I don't want to live it like this. I don't want to be in guilt mode all the time. And I know no one else does either, but I found very, very, very few founders who've gotten past it. Hence why we're talking about it.
Was there still something about the argument? A little bit of guilt is a worthy trade for a better life. Did part of that still ring true for you, or did that just sound like the womp, womp, womp buzzer going off?
You know what it feels like? Weakness. There's this Gordon Gekko version of me that just feels like lunches for wimps. And the only way to succeed is by being this Spartan warrior that's willing to fight through everything. And again, I'm telling you straight up, and I don't just say this, it's a horrible mentality. Right?
Yeah.
It served me in survival mode. It is my biggest enemy in the later stages of my career. Hence why we're talking about it again.
Right.
And so I think at this point, Ryan, I can see exactly what's broken. I'm just having a really hard time fixing it.
Sure. And it's funny. I mean, this is something that you and I, well outside this podcast, talk about frequently, which is how do we change things like this, right? Once we're fully aware and we've talked it out, right? This isn't a conversation that's just in your head anymore. You and I have talked about this. You and Ellie have talked about this. And we've done all the things that seem like the things that you should do, right? Get it out of your head, talk to somebody else about it. Get their feedback, get their support, get their permission, get their, whatever it is that you need. And we've done all of that, right? You came and said, like, I have a hard time walking away for even an hour without feeling like I'm letting you guys down or letting the company down, letting myself down. And we're like, that's not the case, right? Like,
no, you guys have been super supportive.
Hour.
I agree. Everyone around me is saying, like, go do something else.
Despite all the evidence, right? We still can't let go of these things. And
I think it's been hard-coded for a long period of time.
That's the thing. And so it's interesting, right? So, and I don't have any answers for this, but does that mean it's just going to take a long time for you to change the relationship? Or is this an ingrained pattern that you're just going to have to somehow learn to live with and work around? What do you think at this point? Like, do you think that you're capable of changing this? I mean, capable in the sense of, like, are you up for this? Can you do this? Or are you a wimp? Right?
I do. And I'll put it this way, because I know at this point, there's nothing else that I can do in life or achieve in life that's going to be more important than this. Making more money isn't going to change anything. Like, I've already tried that. It didn't work.
Yeah.
Like the problem is the same. It's in the same way people have all kinds of personal issues that they try to project onto something else. I'm not happy in my life, so it must be my job, right?
Right.
I'm not happy in my life, so it must be my relationship. And so they start projecting this onto all these other things, thinking that once they fix that, once I make enough money, these other things will figure themselves out. Or once I find another partner, these things will figure themselves out. What we fail to realize time and time again is it won't. Right? You hear so few stories. And what people are saying essentially is, this part of my life, job, relationships, whatever, is shitty. And I want to get away from that. What they fail to recognize, myself included, that moving to something else won't necessarily have a different outcome. Right? Like, if you hated your last job, you probably hate your next job too. And people can't wrap their head around that. They
can't. Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, we have this specific thing that's making us unhappy, and yet we will then pin the fix of that on something completely unrelated rather than focus on the issue itself, right? I mean, sadly, it's a very, very common part of human nature. I get sad when I hear that statement. So, like, I'm going back. I can hear it echoing over and over in my mind. A little bit of guilt is a worthwhile trade for this, for a better lifestyle, a better life, right? One of the major problems I have with that is that there's no quantification of that, right? Like, how much is a little guilt, and over what period of time, and to what detriment to your overall well-being? And then the other side of it is, how much better does the lifestyle need to be before you'll say it's enough, right? To the point we were making earlier, the bar just keeps rising. And so, because of these fundamental flaws in the logic there, it's really hard to say that, like, yeah, a little bit of guilt's worth it. I don't know. Maybe not. I mean, I'd rather see you not be guilty at all rather than have to make that trade. But is there some sense still? I guess I'm kind of asking the same question again. I heard, your emotional response to it, but practically, do you feel like there's truth in that? Do you feel like, yeah, it's okay to suffer a little guilt to get what we want?
I think it's true, but I think that's actually not necessarily the whole problem. And I'll give you a whole other side to this. Again, we talked about opportunity and consequence. Opportunity are things we're hoping to get to, and consequences are things we're hoping won't happen. Right? Let's talk about the consequence.
So often ends up being the opposite as a founder, doesn't it?
Right. Let's talk about the consequence or where that's driving me. And I'll give you a great example. For years and years and years, I thought that I needed to work myself to death, work like the office hero, right? The office hours hero, where I had to be the first person in the office and the last person to leave. Why did I feel that way? Because I felt like if I didn't do that, the consequence would be everyone would just screw off, right? And no one would work hard and everyone would abandon this thing and whatever.
Yep.
And if they didn't see me working harder than everybody else, they would say, well, dude, he's not working very hard, so I don't have to work hard.
Why would
I was like, then the whole house of cards falls apart. And so for the longest time, I came into work first. I was like in at 6 a.m. and I would leave work last, right? Like 11 p.m., midnight sometimes. And I'm not exaggerating when I say for probably 20 years, I had never driven to or from work in daylight. I mean, it's just insane as that sounds.
Explains your current tan.
That was right. Yeah. Hence why I'm so pale, like a vampire. But what I'm really getting at is what was driving me. Like people would say, oh, look at that ambition. He wanted to build something great. Not true. That's not why I was doing it.
No.
I was terrified. That's why I was doing it. When that alarm went off at 5:30 in the morning, I wasn't like, oh, can't wait to start my day. I was like, if I don't get in soon, the whole thing is going to come crumbling down.
Yeah.
Was there ever an indication that that was true? Did anybody ever tell me that? Did it actually happen? No. That's the worst part about it.
Yeah.
I made that up. And I believed that if I didn't keep doing it, that the world would crumble. Now, here's what's funny. It got tested, Ryan. It got tested because we didn't have offices anymore.
Yeah.
Yep. I couldn't be office hours hero because we don't have a friggin' office anymore.
Would this be a bad time to tell you that like half the people on our payroll don't actually work for us anymore, Will, and haven't for like 12 months? Is this a wrong time to divulge that? We just didn't know when would be good.
We've been bankrupt for 2 years and no one's told you.
Yeah.
By the way, I just want to mention, if what we're talking about today sounds like the kind of discussion you wish you were having more often, you actually can. We're online all day, every day, working through exactly these types of topics with founders just like you. So any question you would have, or maybe some problem you just want to work through, we're here and we love this stuff. And we're easy to find. Head over to groups.startups.com and let's just start talking.
Yes, I agree with all of this. We do, again, it's another one of these self-imposed conditions that nobody's asking us to adhere to. The other side is, look, there is some sense that we do set the pace. So this isn't like we can just do whatever we want. Like, it's called leadership for a reason, right? We do have to set an example. I think that where I started to realize that there was a bit of a challenge here for me was when I was using myself as the only motivation, right? And I just assumed that there was this not quite linear relationship between my output and everybody else's. So I was like, if I wanted the rest of the team to push 10% harder, I'd have to push 30% harder.
Right.
You can imagine that doesn't work for very long before I'm pushing 240% and I'm just dead. So
right.
I eventually realized, like, this is, you can't just do that, right? You cannot predicate the entire performance just based on, overclocking yourself and running that much faster and hoping that everybody else is going to keep up a bit. And it's not healthy for you. It's not a healthy way to motivate everybody else, because at best, they develop the same fear-driven sense of responsibility or guilt-driven sense of responsibility that you have, and they start having the same toxic relationship with work. Worst case is they don't notice that you're doing that shit at all, and nothing happens except that you're the one who's working more, right? And killing yourself. So it's such a dangerous move. But so okay, let's talk about the current state. So now we've gone remote office. We've seen that we don't have to be the Energizer Bunny to keep everybody else working a normal and productive work week. How much did that actually change it for you? How much did that allow you to slow down? Did you start feeling less guilty by not working 60, 70 hours a week?
No, that's the problem. You're seeing a theme here.
Consistent answer here.
Yeah. Well, what I learned without intention was everyone was going to work as hard as they were going to work.
Yep.
I could maybe, if I really, really, really pressed my finger down, get folks to work 10% harder for a very short period of time.
Yep.
But then what I became afraid of, now it's remote work, what if people aren't working at all? Right?
Yeah.
What if everybody's just hanging out on Netflix and chiming in from time to time on their phone? And then I thought about it. Well, you know what? For all people know, that's what I'm doing right now. Right? So it occurred to me that there's in this new world, if you will, there was no way for me to have that lead from the front, charge in first, charge in hardest mentality. Because it just didn't really add up the way it used to.
It's funny, but visceral. It doesn't, right? It's not visceral. It's exactly the thing, right? There's something about being the first person into the office and the last person out. It demonstrates something, right? Being the first Slack message and the last Slack message of the day does not have quite the same weight, does it? It's just not like, oh, well, man, I did something today. I was in first and out last, right? Nobody cares.
Well, because everybody's in first and out last. I mean, exactly. So long as you're on Slack, you're in and out. I mean, you could be in a hot tub for all anybody knows.
Yeah, but my Slack bot doesn't care where I'm at.
Right. And so look, what I realized was how fruitless the effort was and how little changed when I abandoned the effort altogether. In fact, I didn't get a chance to tell you this. A few months back, I was politely asked to stop posting, "Hey guys, how you doing?" at 4 and 5 in the morning every day, because it was just straight up annoying.
Yeah, I've totally lost perspective on all of that because the things come through at random times. I'm sure I end up slacking people late because I'm anywhere between 1 and 2 hours, behind the vast majority of the team, you included, Will. And so like a 4 o'clock message for me hasn't been that weird. Yeah, it did. Yeah, there were some coming through at like 2 and 3 in the morning. Those felt a little strange, but then I couldn't tell. I was like, is he still awake or is he?
Yeah, so bad. What I learned from, again, being the hours hero was maybe there was a time and place for it. Maybe there was some point in either the stage of our company or the stage of my career where it kind of sort of maybe mattered. But here's the problem. I could never know because there was never a way to have a control to find out whether it was true. COVID hits. Everyone bails out of the office. We're 100% remote, and we were pretty remote to begin with. And I just was forced to test that concept. And it turns out no one gave a shit as to whether or not I was in the office. If anything, they were annoyed by it. And I guess as part of my psychosis and all this, I started to realize that I couldn't be constantly in the office or constantly at it and justify to myself that I was doing it because it was keeping everybody else motivated. It actually just got taken completely off the table. And that was a big moment for me to realize that where I prided myself on having that level of commitment, all of a sudden overnight, it was like the world just said, doesn't matter. And I was like, oh shit. Okay. And it became real.
Which is funny because, I mean, not to say that it didn't matter. I think it matters less now. What we don't know is exactly, or maybe it doesn't matter at all now. We don't know exactly how much it mattered before, but suffice it to say, probably not nearly as much as you had hoped. If you look at our Glassdoor, one of our top featured benefits is actually Will's in San Francisco 3 weeks out of the month.
Nobody even knows I moved.
Yeah. So it's one of those things where, like, I think it's an outmoded trope right? I think
Yes.
that, this idea that, we're these badges of honor that, used to mean something, maybe, or at least were a little bit easier to excuse as maybe meaning something that we're just all pretty clear on now are not what we'd hoped. I mean, we dedicated an episode to this, actually probably more than one, at least the one where we talked about, the 40-hour work week and measurability of output versus just, time in saddle, which is related to what we're talking about, right? Like, being the first one and the last one out, brings with it a whole hell of a lot of assumptions. And we've talked about a lot of these in the past, but one of the main assumptions is that all of those hours are equal, right? And that we are absolutely having the same level of output. So if I'm there 12 hours a day, it means I have 50% higher output than people who were just there 8 hours a day. The reality is probably not true. There may be somebody in that office who's just a superstar at what they're doing, who gets what you do in 12 hours done in 4, right? So who's the real winner? Right. So yeah, it reinforces that point that we have to be really, really careful how we measure these things. And in particular, like in this case, what type of nonsense that leads us to embark on, like spending decades in the dark, right? In your case, right? Only being outside of the office at twilight or dawn.
Yeah.
Not good for you, right?
No, being forced to contend with it is the only way it went away. I didn't have a choice. It just went away on its own. The whole world stopped. Yeah. And so I was forced to contend with it, which kind of makes me wonder, do I need to break up with work? And I think it's important to say, I'm not saying, do I need to stop doing my job? I love my job. This is my dream job. It's for both of us. That's the whole reason we built this. And I think this is where it throws people a bit. Because normally,
this is where it gets really tricky.
Right. Normally we say, I'm guilty or I'm this or I'm that. And so I need to stop doing work. I need to sell my company, or I need to move on to something else, or quit my job, whatever it is. I need to make that change. This is one of those cases where I actually can't get a better job. That's the whole reason we built it, is so that I could do exactly this all day. So I know the control in this experiment is that there's nothing else I want to do. So it ain't my job. It's me. Right. But I also know I need to break up my relationship with work, kind of how I relate to work and like how I think about it, how emotionally it makes me feel. And probably as we're talking through this, all of the different assumptions that I've come to believe are true, that probably aren't, that I need to feel guilty. That's clearly not true. But I'll tell you this, man, I genuinely feel like if I stop feeling that way, I will become this homeless loser, that I'll lose everything and I'll be a shell of myself. And I genuinely feel that way. I got to say.
It's funny because I mean, you look at that slightly differently, and it's not the guilt that does it. It's the motivation, right? If you stay motivated, right, none of that happens, right? And so how do we start to separate and isolate those layers that say, like, look, I'm driven by guilt? Well, the important part of that sentence was I'm driven, right?
Right.
What you're driven by, right? And can you change that relationship, right? There's sort of a really, really big assumption there that says I can only be motivated by guilt. That's it. That's the one thing that drives me. Nothing else is going to get me there. So if I don't have guilt, I have nothing. Kind of hard to believe, right? And maybe it's true. I don't know. I've certainly seen you motivated by other things. I don't think that it's purely guilt that motivates you. Maybe it's just the strongest feeling, right? And maybe it's the one that's at the forefront and the one that you're most, I'm going to say, comfortable with. And I don't mean that in like that it feels good, but you accept that is part of this equation. You know it, right? The devil, and so it'd be really interesting to figure out like how we start to explore some of that and say like, well, okay, if not for guilt, like what else can I substitute, right? Is there a stevia to the sugar of guilt? Like how can I still get that same sweet flavor without all this bullshit that comes with it? And I don't have an answer.
What's yours? Mine's clearly guilt, but what's your driver? What's the fuel that keeps you going?
I think it's still, for me, it's still like, and again, like I've tried to become more reasonable, realistic, and objective about some of this stuff. Hasn't entirely worked, but for me, it's still more about trying to live up to some of these. I'm gonna air quote here, standards that I wanted to live up to, right? These standards that I absolutely created out of thin air based on a 5-year-old's view of the world. Sounds smart, doesn't it?
What's an example that you could think of?
Yeah, so things like and so this is one that I'm actually quite proud of that we've achieved. You and I together, in this whole thing that we're doing, is my ability to be present for my kids, right? So there are standards that you want to hit in a lot of different levels. You might say, like, I want a certain salary, right? Well, does that salary come with traveling 300 days a year and never being around? And so is that negotiable, right? Will you accept that to get that other thing, right? That's where that guilt comes in to pay for the lifestyle. I don't want to be guilty about what I'm doing with my kids to pay for the better life, right? Is that objectively a better life at the end of the day? Probably not for the kids. And so that's one of them. That was a really, really important one for me, was to be in a position where, I'm not playing hooky, but like, if there's something important that I need or want to be there for, it's not like, oh, that just can't happen. There's no way that can happen. Now, sometimes I do make those trade-offs. We've talked about this.
Sure.
It doesn't mean that we always pick what we want to do or what's best for us, right? We're not in that position. But the vast majority of the time, I feel fully liberated to be able to make that decision and say, I'll be where I want to be in that moment, knowing that I'll make it up some other way, right? But in some cases, people haven't built their lives in a way that allow for that, or they haven't made those decisions. They haven't chosen to build a life that accommodates that. And so that was one for me. So that was one where, the standard that I wanted to live up to was that in any moment where I felt like I wanted to be there for my kids, or even more importantly, I feel like they want me to be there for them, then I want to be able to do that. A great example this morning, my 10-year-old has been having a little bit of anxiety around heading to school, which is really bizarre because out of the 3 kids, she loves school. The other 2 are in open revolt most days around school. Hannah, on the other hand, wants to be there. And yet when we get there, she's like, I feel nauseous. I feel this, like that. Or, oh, I forgot something. We should probably go home and get it.
Oh,
she
boy.
didn't forget anything, right? So she's just having these little struggles. And so today she came into my office, and I don't know that she's ever asked. She'll ask me sometimes, are you going to take us to school today? But she specifically asked this morning, can you take us to school today? Can you take me to school today, Dad? And I didn't even think about it. I knew I didn't have any calls. I knew there were some things I wanted to get done. But it's like 7:30 in the morning. And I thought, yeah, absolutely, I can. I didn't have to think twice about it. I could just say yes. That is one of the standards that I want to be able to live up to, that I have achieved, right? There are a whole bunch of others that I haven't, right? Like, I loved riding around in my dad's Porsche as a kid. I've yet to buy a Porsche for my kids to ride around in, damn it. Like, I think they need one. I feel like they're leaning into that. And
if
boy,
you need to be
this
talked
would be fun
into
on the
it,
mountain
you're talking
roads
to the right guy.
Yeah. So there's all kinds of things, but I think that as I started, the other thing was a lot of those melted away over time, and I just started to realize how much less important some of those things actually were than others, right? So another big one, and again, this is one that was kind of set by my father. We traveled a lot. I mean, at one point, we didn't have a home. We were very upwardly mobily homeless. We traveled in a motorhome for 1.5 years. It was such an incredible experience to go through. And it's one of those things where, like, how am I going to recreate that for my children? I don't know yet. I don't have. See, that was one of the interesting things. My dad loved his job. He absolutely did. He loves it in a different way than I love what I do, I think. And he had a different ability to kind of turn that relationship on and off. So he just sold his practice at one point. We traveled for 1.5 years. I can't do exactly that, right? I can't just disappear for 1.5 years. Be like, hey, I'm just going to pause. I'll be back. I'll just open a new one, right? You can't just do that, right? It's not the same thing. It's not as easy to recreate what he had. And so I've had to be sober and mindful that there are significant differences between how I have achieved some of the same things that he did. And again, like, this makes me sound like I've just got this checklist and scorecard of things my dad did that I have to accomplish. And that is true to a degree. But I've also been mindful that there are experiences that I didn't have as a kid that I want to create for my children too. And experiences that he didn't have for himself that I want to create. And that was where I really started to think about what was that relationship between my father and work that led to some of the things that ended up being quite negative later in life for him. His health, his weight, his stress, all of these things that eventually compounded into some very, very serious health issues that have had now permanent consequences. And so I have been very adamant now in the last, probably decade of my life, and even more so, like kind of, I'm mid 40s now, heading into late 40s soon, being much more aware of like what the value of that relationship is, my relationship with me and my wellness, my health, my well-being, and how that interrelates and reacts with work. And so I think that was something where I can look at my father and say, he didn't set a great example, right? That is definitely something. Now, great example in that he provided the anti-case, right? Like, don't do this. But this isn't something I'm following him into, and I'm trying to be far more cognizant about how I shape my life and my work relationship, such that I can maintain my health. Because, like you said, you can make plenty of money, you can have all the things you have, but if you're not in a position where you can actually enjoy them physically, mentally, emotionally, what good is it?
I agree. I think if people are listening to this and are starting to relate to what we're saying, I'm hoping they come out with a couple outcomes. The first is I'm hoping they realize that this is a real thing. It's not just, you're not the only one dealing with it. We are all dealing with this. We're all dealing with an unhealthy relationship. And some of these relationships are better than others, but it's pretty common. I've yet to meet a founder who's got this one figured out. On top of that, if you're early in your career, and like a lot of these episodes, I hope you're starting to take notes on this to say, I don't want to do that. So if I see my early indications of these behaviors, I need to change them. I need to go down a different path. On the other hand, if you're later in your career, I hope you're listening to this saying, you know what, I'm kind of in the same boat as these guys. If I don't change some stuff soon, there's no version where this gets better. I can't outwork it. I can't out accomplish it. I can't do anything unless I fix it right now. And even though you and I know where things are broken, I think it's kind of like losing weight. It's not like you don't know how to. It's not like you can't figure it out. But holy cow, doing it is really hard. And my hope is that as folks are listening, as folks are responding, we talk to people, all over on this, that they start to take this super seriously, that they talk to other founders, take it super seriously, and they start to say to themselves, I'm out of time. It's got to be fixed now, because ultimately it's all that matters.
All right, so that was fun, but let's actually keep this conversation going. You've heard what we think about this, but Ryan and I would really like to hear what you think. And we're online like all day long, pretty much talking about every startup topic you could think of, from fundraising to customer acquisition to just really how to get all of this crazy startup stuff out of your head. And there's tons of other founders just like you. They're weighing in on these topics, so you'll get a chance to just hang out and meet some really smart founders. We're also super, super easy to find. You head over to groups.startups.com and let Ryan and I hear what's on your mind. Let's get to know each other a little bit, and let's just start having more of these conversations.